The haunting reason every Titanic passenger was smiling. Imagine this. You are standing on a sun-drenched pier in Southampton, England. The air is thick with the smell of salt, coal smoke, and the most intoxicating scent of all, pure, unadulterated hope. Above you towers a wall of black steel so massive it feels like a mountain has been dropped into the harbor. This is the RMS Titanic. You have a ticket in your pocket, a trunk full of your finest clothes, and a smile on your face that feels like it could light up the entire Atlantic Ocean. But here is the terrifying truth that history books usually skip over. Those smiles were the very thing that sealed their fate. There was a specific hidden reason why the energy on that dock was so unnaturally high, a secret psychological trap set by the builders that made the disaster inevitable. I'm going to reveal exactly what that trap was at the end of this video, and it will completely change the way you see those famous boarding photos forever. Think about the last time you felt truly safe. Now, multiply that by 1,000. That is how the passengers felt on April 10, 1912. The energy was electric. It wasn't just a boat ride, it was a victory lap for the human race. People were laughing, waving handkerchiefs, and cheering so loud you could feel the vibrations in your chest. Why? Because they believed they had finally defeated the ocean. They were told this ship was a floating fortress. They were told that even God himself couldn't sink it. And they believed every single word. Can you blame them? Just look at the sheer scale of the ambition here. This wasn't just transportation, it was a masterpiece of engineering and luxury. If you were a first-class passenger like John Jacob Astor or Benjamin Guggenheim, you weren't just boarding a ship, you were entering a five-star palace that just happened to move. We're talking about Turkish baths, an electric elevator, which was mind-blowing technology at the time, and a dining saloon that looked like it belonged in Versailles. The smiles on their faces weren't just for the cameras. They were the smiles of people who felt like they had conquered the world. But it wasn't just the rich. Look at the third-class passengers, the dreamers from Ireland, Scandinavia, and all over Europe. For them, that smile was about a new life. They had saved every penny, sold their homes, and left everything behind for a chance at the American dream. They were dancing on the decks. Can you imagine the joy? They were leaving behind poverty and struggle for a land of gold, and they were doing it on the greatest ship ever built. To them, the Titanic wasn't a tragedy, it was a miracle. But here is where the story takes a darker turn. You might be thinking, surely someone saw the red flags. Well, there were plenty, but the hype machine of the White Star Line was so powerful that it blinded everyone. Did you know that the Titanic actually had a near collision before it even left the harbor? As she was pulling away, the sheer suction of her massive propellers pulled another ship, the SS New York, right toward her. They missed colliding by just a few feet. In any other scenario, that would be a terrifying omen. But on the Titanic, the passengers just laughed it off. They cheered. They thought it was a demonstration of the ship's incredible power. That is the level of confidence we're talking about here. It was a collective delusion that gripped every single soul on board. And the luxury? Oh, the luxury was a distraction. It was designed to make you forget you were on the water. When you're walking on thick Axminster carpets, surrounded by hand-carved oak paneling and sipping the finest French champagne, the North Atlantic feels like 1,000,000 miles away. The ship was so steady and so massive that passengers famously said they couldn't even feel it moving. It felt like a building. And who expects a building to sink? But let's talk about the crew for a second. Even they were caught up in the magic. Captain Edward Smith was the Millionaire's captain. He was a legend, a man with decades of experience who was supposed to retire after this voyage. He was smiling too. He felt so safe that he famously said he couldn't imagine any condition which would cause a ship like this to founder. Modern shipbuilding had gone beyond that, or so he thought.
Now, I want you to lean in because this is where the mystery deepens. While everyone was celebrating, there were small, quiet mistakes happening in the background that would later cost 1,500 lives. For example, did you know the binoculars for the lookouts were locked away in a cabinet and the key was missing? The lookouts were literally scanning the horizon with their bare eyes. But even they weren't worried. Why would they be? They were on the unsinkable Titanic. As the ship moved across the ocean, the smiles didn't fade, they grew. There were Sunday morning services where people sang hymns of praise. There were card games that lasted until dawn. There was a sense of total, blissful ignorance. They were in a bubble of luxury, protected by steel and arrogance. They ignored the ice warnings that were coming in via the wireless room. Why stop the party for a few ice cubes in the water? That was the attitude. It was a high-energy, high-stakes gamble that they didn't even know they were playing. But now we have to look at the open loop I promised you. Why were those smiles actually a death sentence? It comes down to a psychological phenomenon called normalcy bias. Because the passengers were so convinced of their safety, when the ship actually hit the iceberg, many of them refused to leave. They stayed in their warm cabins, they joked about the ice on the deck, they used pieces of the iceberg to play football or to cool their drinks. They were smiling as if the ship began to tilt. They couldn't process the reality of the danger because they'd been sold a version of reality where danger didn't exist. But the most disturbing secret, the one that truly haunts those photos of smiling faces, is this. The White Star Line knew the ship didn't have enough lifeboats for everyone. They knew it months before the launch, but they decided to remove more than half of the required lifeboats because they felt the deck would look too cluttered for the first-class passengers. They prioritized the aesthetic of a smile over the reality of survival. They were wanting the passengers to feel like they were on a promenade, not a survival vessel. Those people were smiling because the company had intentionally hidden the tools of their salvation to make the ship look prettier. They were walking into a trap designed by decorators and marketers. When you look at those photos now, you see more than just happy people. You see the victims of the ultimate marketing lie. They were smiling because they were told they were gods, only to find out they were all too human. History has a way of repeating itself when we get too confident. We build our own unsinkable systems, our own perfect lives, and we forget that the ocean is always waiting. If you want to make sure that you're the one who sees the icebergs before everyone else, if you want to join the 1% who look beneath the surface of the official story and see the truth, then you know which button to click. Join our inner circle by hitting subscribe and never be left in the dark when the tide starts to turn. The truth is out there, but only for those who are brave enough to look past the smile.